What's up, everyone? This is Jacob Moses, host of the Not Boring Tech Writer, where in each episode, we teach technical writers a different skill so they can enhance their skill sets, improve their marketability, diversify their career, and ultimately break the stereotype that technical writing is a boring career. This episode's skill? Preparing for the future of tech comm. As the tech comm industry develops, technical writers must embrace a sobering truth that writing and editing documents isn't enough to add value to your organization. So the question is, how do we prepare for the future of tech comm so we can ensure we're always adding value to our organizations? Today, our guest, Ted Hudek, programming writer at Microsoft, is going to share his tips on how you can prepare for the future of tech comm, including why you should always have a side learning project, why you shouldn't really freak out about tools, and why you should actively build relationships with your colleagues so you can prepare for the future of tech comm. Enjoy. Hey there, Ted. How are you doing today?
Hey, Jacob. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Great to be speaking with you.
Yes, you as well. We got to connect at Write the Docs in Portland, and gosh, for anyone who's listening to this who works in software documentation, I know I'd probably speak on behalf of Ted as well, where there's no better conference to attend. You're just among like-minded people and getting cutting-edge information and eating little cheesecake squares in between talks. I mean, it's phenomenal, and I'm so pumped that we're bringing the conversation back to the podcast, Ted.
It's a great program they have at Write the Docs, Jacob. I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed meeting you.
Yes.
Jacob and I actually met during a hike on the first day of Write the Docs. They have a hike that goes through, I think it's Washington Park there in Portland, and you get a chance to meet all the diverse tech communicators right out there in the beautiful Pacific Northwest.
Yes,
but,
it was
yeah,
remarkable.
That was a great conference. I really enjoyed it, and it was great to meet you. And I had no idea you had a podcast until you mentioned.
Yeah, and I'm just so thankful that you agreed to be a guest. And gosh, I'm pumped for today's topic. I really am. Just talking about how technical communicators can prepare for the future of tech comm. And I think it's funny that whenever we were trying to decide on a title for this, in our initial call, the term anticipating came up, anticipating for the future of tech comm. And as we continued to unpack it more, we agreed upon that anticipating isn't enough. You can't just think to yourself, okay, like I understand that there will be a time in my career where I need to learn more tools, and when that time comes, okay, like I'll take those steps. But you have to be actively preparing for when that time does come, have the right mindset, have the right tools. So I'm really excited that we're going to be kind of hitting on that side of the future of tech comm. It's going to be a good chat.
I am as well. This should be a great talk.
So Ted, let's start with your story, because I truly think that you're a great example of someone who has been preparing for the future of tech comm, whether that was whenever you weren't even in the discipline, and then now that you are, seeing the future, learning the tools, having the right mindset. So I'd love for you to start just telling us your story.
Yeah, well, I've always just kind of pursued interesting things, and one thing has led to another. I used computers a lot as a kid. I had an Apple II back in the old days, and learned to program BASIC, and was pretty nerdy, like going through high school. But then I got to college, and I didn't really use computers a whole lot, and I got a degree in economics and French.
It's a nice combo.
Wasn't really thinking a whole lot about the future. Was just kind of following my passions. And then I wound up, I decided to pursue a master's in French literature, of all things. So I did that at the University of Virginia. And one thing I've always done is kind of pursued a side interest while I'm doing the main thing. And so when I was studying French, I discovered that I had access to the university's Unix computers. And so I started playing around with Unix and learning that while I was studying French. So a couple years went by, I had my master's in French, and then kind of discovered that I was at a competitive disadvantage for getting a job, because you pretty much need PhD in French, and the people who were going on for a PhD were, kids of French parents and kids who had a lot more French background than me. So I found myself working at the Fine Arts Library at the University of Virginia, where I would work at the checkout desk and actually study computer science, because I kind of got back in touch with computers at that point. Wound up taking some undergrad classes in computer science, and then I went for a master's in computer science, where I went to Ohio State. And while I was doing that, I took German classes. So it's just like, I've always pursued kind of an interesting side thing while I've been doing the main thing. Coming out of Ohio State, I got a job consulting, which was okay, but I was looking for something where I could stay a little bit more local. So I stayed in touch with some folks that I'd met in the computer science grad program, one of whom had come to Microsoft. And she said, "We need some tech writers here." And I said, "What's that?" Very, very little information about what tech writers do. But I came out, and that was about 15 years ago. So I've been working at Microsoft now, 16 actually. I've been working here since 2000.
I love it. And it's a testament to like, when do we get the opportunity to prepare for the future? And I think that really comes from what you hit on, and that's pursuing side interests. Yes, you may have like your formal 9 to 5, but depending on the organization, that might not be enough to really discover new skills and find out actually what you want to pursue in the future. Mm-hmm. And I love how you were doing computer science on the side, and then here we are 15 years later, and you're a program writer at Microsoft.
Yeah, that would be one of my main tips, would be always have a side learning project, and make it something where you can actually try stuff out and learn by doing. When I was playing around with Unix, I'd actually go in and try to program stuff and write scripts and actually make stuff happen.
Yeah. So you came in at Microsoft, and were you initially just doing the very traditional role of the tech writer, just writing and editing documents? What does your time initially at Microsoft look like?
Well, it's funny. I've kind of been in the same area. I've been writing Windows driver docs the whole time, but I've kind of moved around in different technologies within that. So initially, I had kind of the newbie project, which was renovating the READMEs. That each driver sample has a README file. So I came in and they said, "We have all these READMEs and they're really old, so maybe you can update them." And that was cool because I got to actually meet like a lot of different people on product teams.
Awesome.
So it was a good way to kind of diversify my network a little bit.
And then at what point, or has this, I'm sure this time has come, where the role of the tech writer, you weren't called to solely write and edit documents. There must have been a shift in there when you were called to get more involved in programming languages. When did that shift come, and how did you handle it?
Well, that's a good question. I guess just as I started writing the actual API documentation, I was kind of forced to get enlisted in the source, Windows source, become more proficient in C and C++. I'd set up code projects myself and actually try to play around with the code a little bit, step through it in the debugger. I think anything you can do that's hands-on. We actually had a kind of a virtual team here one time where we, everybody was actually doing hands-on coding of drivers for the team. Like the rule of the team was that you actually had to do hands-on coding. It wasn't just writing about it or talking about it, but you actually had to show some code.
Very good. Yeah, so we established one action item to really preparing for the future of TechComm, and it's always pursuing something on the side. It's like not restricting yourself to what you're doing for your formal job. Pursue something on the side. And then you got into Microsoft, a lot of writing and editing. And let's take a shift. So we're really seeing that writing and editing isn't enough to really ensure your spot as a tech writer in the future. We're being called to do much more like symbolic analytic work, really just rethinking how we manage, reconfigure, and really just customize information for different audiences, different media. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think the future of TechComm looks like, and some action items, a particular mindset that you think technical communicators should adopt today to ensure that they still have a job 5+ years from now.
Yeah, Jacob, I think that's a great question. I think the the writer's job is becoming more about synthesizing content, where you're actually combining things into a coherent whole. Like I frequently find that I'm trying to tie together all these little bits and put them in a useful organization that'll actually help someone accomplish a task. Maybe you're tying together high-level scenarios. And then there's also that as a content specialist, you're probably wearing a lot of different hats. You're building some tools. Maybe you're doing some of the coding for samples. Maybe you're actually getting the content up on the web. First of all, you have to be able to synthesize and pull content together and organize it effectively. And then you kind of have to know the whole content life cycle, from writing it and iterating on it internally and then publishing it externally.
And I think that's where technical communicators have just an incredible advantage, and where they can really prove their value to their organization, because we're generalists and we're not deeply invested in dev. We're not deeply invested in QA. However, we have our hands in everything. We have that general theme of the organization. And that's why I think knowledge management is going to be huge. I mean, right now and then in the future, because I think we're the only ones in the organization who really do understand the content as a whole, whether that's internal or external content. And like you said, being able to synthesize and pull little pieces of content, I really think that's where we're going to shine, as maybe the traditional tech writing role kind of diminishes.
Yeah, I completely agree. I really like how you put that. So it's like writing is no longer sufficient. You have to be able to kind of be the bridge between a lot of different areas. One thing I've been thinking about, and we heard a presentation about this at Write the Docs, is the idea of minimum viable documentation. Where you have something that's good enough and you push it out and then you iterate on it if needed. And this is facilitated by our new capacity to publish instantly. And there's also the idea of just-in-time documentation, which is kind of similar in that you're just writing the documentation that customers need right now and getting that out to them. So it's kind of a more immediate, it used to be 10 years ago, we'd spend months writing stuff for the next rev of Windows, and then all of a sudden one day we'd push it all out. Now it's a lot more iterative and immediate. So it's kind of like what you see across the industry, right? I mean, if you work at the New York Times, you're probably doing a lot more blogging, or maybe you push some information out on Twitter, to get what's needed out the door, even if it's in a rough format, and then you can expand and collaborate, if you need to.
Yeah, because I mean, we're in a support economy. We can't just mass produce things anymore and just hope that or expect the customer to use it. I mean, and that's going back to the minimal viable product and just-in-time documentation. I mean, it's being dictated by the customer. I mean, we're creating content just to give them some direction, and then it's iterated, it's expanded based on the actual customer's feedback. And gosh, I think that's just going to continue to develop, undoubtedly.
Yeah, the whole notion of using GitHub and having customers, collaborate right there in the docs, and to be able to have a conversation right there in the context of a pull request, I think just gives us a lot more flexibility than we've had before.
I completely agree. Well, Ted, let's talk about tools. I really liked the conversation we had before this call, and just talking about the right mindset you should have with tools. Because I think especially a lot of people who are new into tech comm really worry about tools. It's like, okay, I have to know the Adobe Creative Suite. I have to know whatever else. But I don't necessarily think that there's a prescribed list of tools that we have to learn, but more so, and that's what we'll hit on now, it's more of a mindset and understanding when and how to learn that tool.
Right.
And you have a great example that I'd love for you to expand on.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. I would say this. I was talking before about always having a side learning project. I think among the first things that you need to acquire as far as tools when you start your tech communicator career is find out what your Swiss Army knife is going to be. That's what I'll call it. You need something that you can use like for automation, for scripting. PowerShell is my particular passion, but it could be Perl, it could be Python. But I kind of got into PowerShell for some small task that I needed 5-6 years ago, and then I had another automation scenario, and I thought, well, maybe I could write a script to do that, and so I keep adding little bits and pieces to my knowledge of PowerShell, and by this point, I have a library of my own help routines and automation scripts that I've written that I can dig into and piece together, and it's kind of a superpower. Like, it enables me to do things that I would not have imagined before.
And I love that mindset behind it and the motivation to learn PowerShell. There's a problem statement. It's like I had this issue, therefore I learned this tool.
Yeah.
And I think that can really help not have tech writers feel so overwhelmed about like tools that they have to learn in the future, but more so look at your own. What are your problem statements? Right. What are you encountering? And then learn a tool to help solve that problem.
Right.
So Ted, let's talk about the value of just building relationships with your colleagues and how those relationships can help technical communicators prepare for the future. I mean, we started this podcast just showing love to the Write the Docs conference. And that's because it gave us an opportunity just to meet awesome fellow tech writers and to share ideas and share perspectives and share expertises. And gosh, I can't think of a better way to stay relevant and to be prepared for the future than just to be in continuous conversation with fellow technical communicators.
Jacob, that's really a great topic. But one of the things that I like to ask people is just kind of a random question, but I ask people, how did you get started with that? Like when they're telling you about something cool that they're doing, or hey, studying this, or it could be anything. Just it's kind of a great line of questioning that can help you discover cool things. One cool thing about tech writers is the array of backgrounds that they come from. So typically when you ask that, you get some pretty interesting answers. Another question I like to ask people is, what should I learn next? That's a good one. I actually asked Eric Holscher that. He's the organizer of Write the Docs. And he came back with Lector and Swagger, which I've actually not had time to investigate yet, but are on my list of things to look up. Because like the same things that they're learning might help you too, or lead you to a solution that you can use, right? Because we're all facing the same higher level problems as tech writers. So like there's a lot of built-in common ground.
Yep. And I love that first question, like where did this come from? Because you understand like the full spectrum.
Yeah.
And then it's often, I mean, just that simple little icebreaker question that really gets the conversation going. And then once you understand each other's backgrounds, like you said, you can dig a little deeper and say, like, I can tell, like, you know your stuff. Like,
yeah.
Do you have any advice? What should I learn next? And then as that conversation continues, I mean, then you can reciprocate and give your own insights later on. I love that, Ted.
Yeah. A couple other ideas I'd throw out for building relationships with your fellow tech writer, or really anyone, any colleague. One thing is the value of the occasional lightweight ping, right? Like people you might not have seen in a while, grab a coffee, drop them a line on social media. One thing I like to do is track people's birthdays. You can pop up and wish them a happy birthday. It'll surprise them.
Yeah, and just checking in and saying hello, and that's something powerful that Eric hit in episode 5 in this podcast. It's not to think of these relationships as like a transactional relationship. I do something for you, you do something for me.
Right.
But it's just very good natured, and that's right. Just popping in a light ping, just saying like, "Hey, how are you? Let's get coffee. Happy birthday," if it's applicable.
Right.
But just staying on each other's radars and just keeping that constant conversation is huge.
One thing I enjoy is, just learn a little bit about people's families or their hobbies. How about this on today's Monday? Ask if people had a good weekend.
Yeah.
Like even with something so simple, you'll be surprised at what you get.
You're building that rapport. And so we talked about the Write the Docs conference. I mean, do you have any other suggestions where listeners can find fellow technical communicators and start to build these relationships?
Well, Twitter is one that I've kind of been trying to grow into. Twitter there's kind of a surprisingly deep dynamic for something that sounds so simple on the surface, but you get the result is you just get some really interesting interactions with people. One thing that I've been applying since I met you, Jacob, is the power of just asking.
Yep.
Even if someone, is a big name or a VIP, if you have a question or, want to ask their opinion, just ask. And that's something that you can do easily on Twitter. You don't have to be connected both ways to just ask somebody something.
That's exactly right. And people, in my experience, are so willing to share their expertise. If you come with the right approach, it's maybe propose your problem statement or what you're trying to learn and how you see something in them that you want to strive for. You want to get to that level of expertise or whatever it might be. And if you propose the question correctly, people seem to be down to give that feedback.
Yeah. And that kind of connects to another thing I've thought, which is, bounce your ideas off people. Mm-hmm. Say, hey, I wanted to get your opinion about this idea that I had.
Yeah, it's that concept of design thinking, not just thinking that you only have what's in your mind and then keeping it in there until you have a final product and then finding out that people aren't really into it. But if you're sharing your idea along the ways and getting those different perspectives, and gosh, that all goes back to just having those relationships with technical communicators, and as they have their experiences and you have yours, and the combination of the two, I think, really prepares the technical communicator for the future. Just that constant conversation of just being relevant.
Right. Well, I'd also say once you've gone to the trouble of learning something cool, pay it back. Teach what you've learned.
Yeah.
Right. You'll likely feel like an imposter. Expect that, and go ahead and do it anyway. And then once you've done that a few times, hey, present at a conference. I tried that one out myself recently.
Yeah, and rocked it. I write the dogs.
A few months before, my manager said, you should give a talk. So on my list of goals for the next few months, right, because we keep, a little list like that.
Yeah.
I put, consider submitting a proposal for Write the Docs. Mm-hmm. I sent it to my manager. He crossed out consider and changed it to submit. I
love it.
Do I have to? But as soon as I decided that I was going to do it, I realized that I could do it. And of course, it was still somewhat terrifying, but also completely exhilarating. I reckon.
Yeah, and you did a wonderful job. And I love that story, Ted, because you want to have even considered, or it sounds like you want to have considered speaking, but you had this little nudge from your manager. And then once you started that conversation, you're like, okay, this is something I can do. And that undoubtedly boosted your career.
Power of the nudge is important. I kind of had this idea in the back of my head that maybe I could, but I don't know if I actually would have done it. But sometimes you can play that role for someone else where you kind of give them a nudge, as I'm trying to nudge you to present at Write the Docs next year.
I'm thinking about it.
Which kind of connects us to telling stories.
Yep.
Right? We're all storytellers, and especially tech writers,
mm-hmm.
right? Everybody loves a good story. So I've actually studied storytelling, and it's kind of interesting to see how stories are put together and what makes a good story work.
Yes, undoubtedly, and then tying that story back in with what you do as a technical communicator, just makes your story all the more intriguing and more applicable to fellow tech writers.
Here's another one. Never have lunch alone.
I like
occasionally that. You have to, but most of the time, get a recurring lunch on the calendar with key people, and then add new people to your lunch mix periodically. We all have to eat, and you can actually consider it work time if you're actually getting to know someone or figuring out what their approach is to some work problem that you've had.
Yeah, I love that. And we had Neil Kaplan on the podcast too, and we were talking about bridging the gap between documentation and support. And it's awesome, Ted, because he shared that same testament where, just get up out of your desk and spend some time with people, have some conversation, have lunch together. That's the best way to start that relationship.
Exactly. Doesn't have to be a big formal thing. In fact, it's a lot better if you just start lightweight. When you're in a meeting, say something,
mm-hmm.
right? You may be sitting in a meeting, time may be going by, your mind is drifting, you haven't said anything. Challenge yourself to say one thing no matter how short a comment it may be.
Yeah.
Right? You may be surprised how it pulls you in and helps you connect.
I love that. And then going back to some of the platforms where people can start these relationships, we talked about Twitter, and another great one that comes to mind is the Write the Docs Slack room, which I'll put in the show notes. But that's just a great place where constant conversation is happening, and you can drop in a question, you can give feedback. I mean, I think of all the places, if you can't make it to the conference, to have that daily conversation, there's no better place than that Write the Docs Slack room.
Yeah, Jacob, I've really been impressed with how the Write the Docs Slack channel has continued even after the conference, right? Mm-hmm. The conference is in May, and here we are late in June, and there's still a lot of activity there.
Yeah, there's the channel, and then, the local meetups even. I think there might be 15 or 20 across the U.S.
There's a jobs board as well. So if you're looking for a job, you can join that channel and check it out.
Yeah.
All kinds of great resources, and tech writers are just such a friendly bunch in general.
They are. They really are.
And like it's interesting that we're, I mentioned this earlier, but we're all sort of trying to solve the same problems, mm-hmm. like in our own way at our own company. So, something you may think you're facing alone, odds are pretty high that you're not. And if you ask what kind of approaches people have used in a venue like the Write the Docs channel, you might get some great answers that could help.
Yeah, and like you said, don't fear just to speak up.
Yep.
Whether it's in that meeting or you find yourself in a massive room of technical communicators in Portland, Oregon, like you said, it is just a delightful bunch, and everyone's there just trying to just have conversation and get to know one another and help. And that's just the beauty of our discipline. It's niche. There's not a lot of us, but golly, when we gather and start talking, I mean, it's powerful. There's great stuff happening.
Yep. Completely agree.
Well, Ted, just thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today about just how technical communicators can prepare for the future of TechComm. We covered a lot of great action items, and I really hope the listener feels encouraged and just ready to take it on, because it's not too scary.
You bet, Jacob. And, even for those in the audience who may not be in tech writing today, consider it. It's a great opportunity of being able to mix the humanities and the technical.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's really unique. It's kind of a unique bridge career where you can do both of those things. Not everyone can do both, and, we need the folks who can.
And whenever things get tricky, there's people willing to help you.
That's right.
Just speak up and say, hey, like, I see that you're good at this. Can you help me out a bit?
Exactly.
And they're going to be down.
Speaking of asking, thank you, Jacob, for asking me to be on your podcast. I really enjoyed it. It's always a pleasure.
Of course. It was a pleasure to get to know you in Portland, and now we get to keep the conversation going. And with the theme of the end of our podcast, I know we'll keep it going beyond.
That's right. And, everyone should come to Write the Docs next year and listen to Jacob give a presentation.
Oh, golly. I got to get a running note card of themes going, but
that's right.
Gosh, I appreciate the encouragement.
Yeah, you bet.
If anyone wants to connect with you further, where can people find you on the internet?
Twitter is probably the best way. I'm at Ted Hudek, TEDHUDEK. Just give me a shout out there. I'd be glad to chat with anybody.
Beautiful. Well, Ted, thank you again, man. Great chatting once more, and we'll reconnect again soon.
Thanks, Jacob. Really enjoyed it.